Welcome to my channel. Before we proceed, I just want to say you're subscribed is my treasure. Joe Biden has tried to become president for 3 decades. That dream is now a reality. He had what it takes to win, but does he have the stamina for 4 years in the White House? He has been knocking around American politics for half a century, his political career beginning when Richard Nixon was in the White House and America was still sending men to the moon. But this is one candidate for whom age may be an asset. In his long life, Mr. Biden has suffered personal loss more than most, and supporters say that has given him an empathy for a nation suffering the pain and grief of the COVID-19 pandemic. Advertisement friends say Mr. Biden's strength of character and decency is what America needs in these extraordinary times, and that will help him prevail. He became the 5th youngest senator in U.S. history in 1972. A few weeks later, tragedy struck the Biden family. He lost his wife Nelia and 1-year-old daughter Naomi in a car crash that also left their 2 sons, Hunter and Beau, badly injured. His ability to rise above that tragedy is well known by Americans. He was determined to see his boys every night, taking the hour-and-a-half train journey from Delaware to Washington, D.C. at the start and end of each day to say goodnight to them. When others might have fallen apart, Mr. Biden found the strength to carry on both then and when ill health and more tragedy struck later in his troubled life. Senator Joseph Biden takes the oath of office in his son Beau's hospital room as he recovered from injuries sustained in the car crash which killed his wife Nelia. He suffered multiple aneurysms in 1988, surviving one 9-hour operation to save his life. Then in 2015, one of those 2 boys he was so devoted to both died of brain cancer aged 46. Biden's grief was one reason why he chose not to run against Mr. Trump at the time. He has said how his father frequently said, "Champ, the measure of a man is not how often he is knocked down, but how quickly he gets up." But there is also a sense of fatalism about Mr. Biden. He is quoted as saying he believes that life balances out people's suffering and fortune. The bigger the highs, the deeper the troughs. He had seemed to be heading for another trough at the start of 2020 as his campaign to become the Democratic presidential contender began to flounder. He had entered as the frontrunner as a former vice president, but by February the campaign's wheels were spinning and the candidate was sometimes lost for words and almost ottery on the trail. But then Mr. Biden's fortunes turned again. Having looked in serious trouble in Iowa, he seized victory a month later in South Carolina, setting himself on the path to victory. Fiercely contested primary season tested Mr. Biden. He was accused of handsiness, or a tendency to invade women's personal space, and there was plenty of awkward footage making the point. His friends and supporters say his tactility springs from his warmth and empathy. But during the campaign he was forced to admit his behavior was no longer appropriate. Mr. Biden developed a close relationship with Mr. Obama during their 8 years in office. In a video statement he told voters, "I get it. The boundaries of personal space have been changed." He also denied accusations by former Senate staffer Tara Reid that he sexually assaulted her in 1993. The woman who is now his vice president, Kamala Harris, criticized his support for segregationists early in his career when he joined them opposing school busing to racially integrate schools, and his drafting of the 1994 crime bill that led to mass incarcerations, lengthy jail sentences, and the proliferation of more and more prisons has dogged his political career ever since. Mr. Biden can have a clumsiness with words while at the same time being an accomplished debater. His gaffes or Bidenisms are legendary, and at times he has appeared decidedly out of touch. He has borrowed words too, most notoriously in 1988 when he plagiarized a speech by Neil Kinnock word for word. To be fair, he had credited the former British Labour leader on previous occasions, but at least once seemed to present the words as his own. But he was able to play on the strengths of a lifetime in public service to rout his Democrat rivals and present himself as the competent alternative to President Trump. A seasoned, steady hand on the wheel in a time of plague and chaos. 8 years as vice president allows Mr. Biden to claim Barack Obama's successes as his own both at home and abroad. Those who know him from those years say it's his length of service and what he's gained from it that makes him stand out as a potential president. Sir Peter Westmacott, who was British ambassador to the U.S. during the Obama years, told Sky News that Biden is hugely experienced. Sir Peter said, "He's got an extraordinary wide range of contacts around the world. He does know a great deal and cares a lot about different countries that he's got to know. He will be a man who understands that in many areas he needs to have young, capable people to whom he can delegate rather than try to do it all himself. I don't think he'll have any illusion about that." Mr. Biden sees himself as the champion of the blue-collar white voter, and his close relationship with America's first black president has further cemented his support among African Americans. He will need to maintain the support of ardent Democrats and engage the backing of others who have drifted away from his party or even moderate Republicans disaffected by the Trump presidency. Mr. Biden's pitch is to restore and build on Mr. Obama's legacy and unite a divided country after the turmoil of the Trump years and the rioting at the Capitol. What kind of president can we expect? His first priority will be dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. He has been sharply critical of Mr. Trump's handling of the virus. His administration will need to sort out the testing debacle and control the virus sufficiently to allow the U.S. economy to break free from lockdown. His supporters warn against assuming his presidency will be simply a restoration to the Obama era, just a correction from the Trumpian aberration. Those advising him on economic policy have said it will be radical, almost Rooseveltian in terms of spending and investment both to overcome the impact of COVID-19 and deal with climate change. He wants to spend $2 TRN putting America on the path to eliminating carbon emissions by the middle of the century. Given his family's tragic history and his own brush with death, it is no surprise that Mr. Biden is placing a lot of emphasis on health. As he put it in an early TV ad, healthcare is personal to him. He hopes to reinforce Mr. Obama's reforms to healthcare but stops short of the healthcare for all proposals advocated by his former Democrat rival Bernie Sanders and others on the more progressive wing of his party. On the world stage, President Biden is likely to try and restore America's place at the center of the multilateral, rules-based world order that the U.S. has led since World War II after the years of President Trump's more isolationist economic nationalism. As a former vice president and chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he is a firm believer in the Pax Americana and has spoken out against the damage he says Mr. Trump has done to America's standing in the world. His challenges on that world stage will be considerable. The world has moved on since he was vice president. China has grown in power and tensions have increased between the two superpowers. Europe is not the same since Brexit and the rise of populist parties. Vladimir Putin has become increasingly meddlesome, not least with regards to American democracy. And the Middle East has changed under President Trump. Mr. Trump has moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, discarded the Iranian nuclear deal and brokered a deal normalizing relations between Israel, the U.A.E. and Bahrain. How much of that will Mr. Biden try to reverse? Mr. Biden harks back to a possibly lost age at home, too. He has talked of restoring the spirit of bipartisanship in American politics. The Founding Fathers designed a system of government that works only when there is some sense of compromise. That has been lost in the bitterly adversarial politics of both the Obama and Trump years. Mr. Biden says he wants a return to cooperation across the aisle on Capitol Hill to solve America's pressing problems. If anyone has the experience, charm and friends in both parties to dispel some of the bitter antagonisms of the last two presidencies, it may be Mr. Biden. The Americans had a choice between two very different politicians who both claimed to have the common touch, that direct line to the hearts and minds of the ordinary voter. But while Mr. Trump was born into wealth, Mr. Biden started life in the blue-collar town of Scranton, northeast Pennsylvania, the son of a used car salesman. His hardscrabble beginnings and the challenges of a tragic life have given him a tough strength of character and sense of decency, say those who know him well. Campaign officials claim to try to put him on the phone with an ordinary voter every day of his campaign, in calls that often overran as he offered advice and solace. He may not be known for soaring oratory, but words to comfort and console a grieving nation will come to him more easily than most. Mr. Trump called him sleepy and slow. His friends call him decent and full of humanity. There is none of the excitement offered by Mr. Trump or the hope and change inspiration promised by Mr. Obama. But that may not be what many Americans are looking for now. There will be a slower pace at the White House, and many Americans hope it will come with the competence and wisdom of a veteran of half a century in politics and public service. The election was rough and nasty, and it stayed that way after Mr. Biden won. Friends say he has a resilience that goes back to his tough upbringing and the trials of his life. At the age of 77, Mr. Biden's strength of character allowed him to fulfill his dream. Now the reality of the job lies ahead. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, don't forget to subscribe.